Winding down Lake Road on Lasqueti Island is a quiet valley surrounded by a native forest. Thanks to the generosity and foresight of one of Lasqueti's well-known characters, Johnny Osland.
So we walked around his property and he introduced me to so many of the places, so many of these special little gems that he'd discovered over his 64 years on the land. And one of the places that he showed me repeatedly was the tide mark on the rocks directly across from his house. And clearly, it had been a wetland. I asked Johnny what he would think if that went back to being a wetland. And he was very philosophical about it. He said, well, that won't be for me to decide. If that was the way things went.
The transition from what locals called a sheep swamp in the early 1900s, next to a field, and now to a lake, is a story of change.
It was quite stable for 4 or 5 years, the water level, and all this lush vegetation grew in, and it was full of red-winged blackbirds and swallows, and it was beautiful wetland. And then we noticed that the water level was starting to rise. And then looking at the dam, which is at the end of the wetland, you could see that the dam level had been raised, and obviously it was the work of beaver. Of course, they don't just eat vegetation in the winter, they eat the wood. So there's not many alders. They like deciduous wood, alder, willow, that kind of thing. The beaver won't stay long because there's only like a few handfuls of alder, almost no willow. They'll just run out of food and move on. But it turns out that coastal beaver they've adapted to eating cedar.
By February of 2022, the Islands Trust Conservancy, the Lasqueti Island Conservancy, and everyone involved had to take a step back and reconsider. The question was, do we simply go with the natural forces of the beaver, try to reduce their impacts on the trees and plants, or maybe install a beaver deceiver in the dam? The decision to accept the natural order and adapt brought its own restoration activities. In November of 2025, Link volunteers began the task of building a loop trail up to the top of the ridge and back down to the now beautiful lake, full of wintering ducks, spring swallows, and numerous other wildlife that share this beautiful and biodiverse nature reserve. The ever-changing Osland Nature Reserve is open for public access, nature education, and enjoyment, thanks to the lasting legacy of Johnny Osland.